Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I hope that this morning will be an interesting moment of dialogue. In fact, I got up very early this morning and I didn't know what to do at 3 o'clock. So I went down to check internet and there was no connection of internet. And there were many books, at the ground floor. And I just picked up one book in which I found very interesting insight for today. And it was talking about the spirituality of dialogue of Jesus. And it was said dialogue has to be an experience of healing. And when I just saw the program of today, it is going to be a big challenge, for us to have this experience of healing with 4 consecutive presentations. But 3 actually resource persons has put a word of dialogue in their title, and I hope that this is going to be experience of healing with one another and with our own church in Asia. And so I would like to invite first Father Soosai Arokiasamy, who is the former consultant of the FABC Office for Theological Concern and actual advisor for the Office for Human Development. He is also a theological advisor of the CBCI, Catholic Bishops' Conference of India. And he's from Delhi. I just said that dialogue has to be an experience of healing because it said the person who is going to speak, certainly it would be the case of Father Arokiasamy, will speak straight and direct language. And also the people who are listening to this sharing has to be very much concentrate to listen his speech and also try to feel what he is sharing. And only when these 2 ways of communication happens, it's going to be a process of healing. So I hope that this morning session will be an experience of healing for us. So Father Arokiasamy.
Thank you. So good morning to all of you. Paul had asked me to speak about theology of dialogue, and I was wondering, we always speak about dialogue, we never rarely think about theology of dialogue. Of course, I confine myself to basically my knowledge of the FABC, and therefore I confine my reflection to the theology dialogue that is emerging from FABC, its own concerns, its own commitments to this. And all of us who are here, we come from different countries. All of us come from countries where we live with people of other faiths. In India, majority are Hindus, we are also Muslims. You come to Thailand, Burma and so on, the big Buddhist ambience there and so on. In Indonesia, which has the biggest population of Muslims and so on. All of us come, either from East Asia, you always say either Buddhist or Taoist or the other one, Confucian tradition, culture out there. So we are all people coming from a situation where we have been living with people of other faiths. That's why I start with this short reflection and data. When we reflect on dialogue and its theology, we know that 85% of the people of the world who do not belong to the Christian community live in Asia. Of this, only 4.5% are Christian and 3% are Catholic. So we are also aware of a minority situation. But commitment dialogue is not simply a response to a minority situation, which may be so pragmatic and practical. But it's more than that. That's what I want to say. We have a theological vision which helps us to enter into this relationship with the people of other faiths, because God's own presence and action in all people. And you know that we start with this. In Asia, people of different faiths have lived a life of dialogue for a long time, and we continue to live it today. Relations between people and daily encounter are part of people's life and history. And the Asian people have a deep sense of community, spontaneity of compassion, and consistent desire for harmony of life. Intercultural, interreligious relations define their dialogue of life. They also experience occasional conflicts also. And therefore their collective wisdom of born of their own sense of community, compassion, harmony also helps them how to handle these conflicts. So that is our dialogue is the way of life, style of life of Asia. And I want to emphasize when you use the word dialogue, what we want to emphasize is relationship. That's why I put a word like this. The reality tag for all forms of dialogue is building relationship between communities and people. Okay, that I have only 3 parts, and the 3 parts. But the first part I only mentioned the openings of the opening of the window of the Second Vatican Council for fresh air in the church, which calls for a church in dialogue. Second part I reflect on the praxis and theology dialogue in FABC. Third part I reflect on the future praxis and dialogue, some points which I, in my opinion, are important to develop, to keep in mind. First I want to underline the dialogue of life mentioned above historically precedes the openings of an interreligious dialogue for Vatican II. This is not thing only because Vatican II opened the windows for the dialogue, we become a church of dialogue. Even before that, people in Asia, the Christians in Asia, have been living a dialogue of life. In our own schools and colleges, I have in mind my own country, schools and colleges, in centers of healthcare or other institutes of development, most of the people are people of other faiths. If it's the colleges, most of the students belong to other faiths. If it's the hospital, most of the patients come from other faiths. That is part of our life. So I want to keep that always in mind. And now, FABC also in its agenda for interreligious dialogue, for mission, assumes this history of dialogue of life of Asian peoples. Dialogue of life has been part of the history of Asian peoples, always there. Without romanticizing it, there are also moments of conflict, but definitely, positively speaking, there has been always a consistent practice of interreligious relationship, people living with people of other faiths as own family members. In my own country, my Hindu brothers, we call them my uncle, auntie, my elder brother, younger brother in our own terms, in Tamil and so on. We use that. And at the occasion of death, marriage and so on, we all become one. All the celebration become one. Okay. Now we're coming to part 1, the opening of the council for the interreligious dialogue. We call it opening the windows for fresh air. Because John the 23rd used this phrase. When convoking the council, let us open the windows of the church for fresh air to blow in. We could speak of the theological church because of that. People like Rahner already looking at the whole Vatican Council said, it is no more a church of Europe. What we have seen in the council, a world church. We expressed that expression, we are in a situation of world church, and so on. But this world church comes from great diversity of people in their faiths and cultures. That's what we want to express that. An important document of the council is what we call Nostra Aetate, the relationship of the church to non-Christian religions. And that's an important document. It is one of the documents passed in the last year of the council, 1965. There is also another document called the famous document, Pastoral Constitution of the Church in the Modern World. At that time it was a very progressive document. It speaks of a whole church in dialogue with the world, contemporary world in all its aspects. And the number 1 of the famous thing of that council document, Gaudium et Spes, that is Joy and Hope. That is the Latin title for Church in the Modern World. And it says all the people's struggles, yearnings, it is put like this. The Catholic Church rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions. Okay, that's another thing. But Holy Space uses another expression that all the joys and sorrows and all the things are part of the church, and there is an expression which I can render this way: nothing human is alien to the church. And people like John Paul II and others would say the way of the church is the way of the human person. The way of the church is the way of the human person. Then the other documents are there. I do not just mention briefly. Then there is also another important document of the Council, Church on Religious Liberty, Dignitatis Humanae, of human dignity, speaks of human dignity in relation to religious liberty. It not only speaks of the freedom of conscience, but also the foundation. It also provides the foundation for religious liberty for all people. It is also a great change in the attitude of the mind, because the attitude of the church in the 19th century, the Pius IX wrote the syllabus of errors, in which freedom of conscience was considered to be an error. Now here Council solemnly gives a document, a declaration on religious liberty, which is also very important for interreligious dialogue. We respect the religious freedom everyone has got in our country, in our world. Then we have also some important post-conciliar document. Pope Paul VI gave an important kind of a basic document on dialogue called the Ecclesiam Suam. In his church, the Church of Christ, there is a basic way of living, basic way of mode of doing mission, etc. That is the way of dialogue. It speaks three concentric circles of dialogue and so on and so forth. Therefore, you recognize the need for dialogue in the changing relationship between the sacred and the profane, demanded by the pluralism of society. The post-conciliar document also affirms the dialogue agenda. In 1984, there was Secretariat for Non-Christian. Those days it was called non-Christian. Today we will say people of other faiths. Gave a very beautiful dialogue statement in which it emphasizes people of all religions, we travel together in a common pilgrimage towards the goal of God's reign, where all people will enjoy the fullness of life. It all speaks in that kind of language. And it also, at the time also, Pope John Paul also said something very important. He says, the importance and the need for which interreligious dialogue assumes for all religions and all believers, called today more than ever to collaborate so that every person can reach his transcendental goal and realize his authentic growth, and help cultures preserve their own religious and spiritual values in the presence of the rapid social change. And that is, and the Pope addressed these words to the Secretary for Non-Christians in 1984. That is the most of the beginning, one of the important documents it gave. And the other dicasteries also come out. Once, and there is another important document brought out by Pontifical Council for in Dialogue and the Congregational Evangelism in the Peoples, known as the Dialogue and Proclamation. It states that basically both should be there in a balanced way, in an interrelated way. That's also an important document. Benedict XVI, the present one, speaking about responding to the letter of the 138 Islamic scholars on the common word, he says this: the path to true dialogue lies in effective respect for the dignity of every human person, on objective knowledge of the religion of the other, on sharing of religious experience, and finally on common commitment to promoting mutual respect and acceptance among the younger generations. These are also important words we have to keep in mind. Then the apostolic exhortation after the Synod for Asia, called Ecclesia in Asia, the Church in Asia, also basically affirms the perspectives of the Council, but also the attention to the understanding and practice of interreligious dialogue, FABC. Some people used to call the post-synodal, the Synod for Asia is nascent, maybe an exaggeration, but there is some truth in it. Yeah, Synod of FABC, as it were. People would say. Some may not like that, but there is some truth in that. Now I am coming to the theology of dialogue, the practice and theology dialogue in the FABC tradition. This is the main part, and I will evaluate at the end and also give the points for the future. One preliminary observation. I make two simple introductory observations. In a FABC document, one would not find an professor development of theology of dialogue. What we find is the consistent emphasis on dialogue as the way of being church and the mode of doing mission in Asia. The FABC does provide also the theological parameters for this mode and practice of mission of the church, which would imply the theology of dialogue. Then, besides, we keep in mind that theology of dialogue is not a theology of propositions. It's always one based on the experience of dialogical relations and engagement, therefore, of praxis. In this dialogue, I would like to underline the need for a sound theology of religions, and it's important for the practice of dialogue. Today, Asian theologians struggling with a sound theology of religions. Theology of religions is intimately connected to what we call theology of dialogue or dialogical praxis. Though I do not enter into that, it's also a complex topic with various opinions, but it's an important, significant development in the church and also in the theology in Asia. In a theology dialogue, the following idea is significant. And when we enter into dialogue, we are not bracketing out our faith, as it were in the epoche, as we say in philosophy. We do not bracket our faith in an epoche, but we remain rooted in our faith, but with the basic openness to the self-understanding of other religions. Not only open to other religions, their faith, we are open to how they understand their own religion. Self-understand, their self-understand is very important for theology of dialogue. When I gave a paper on liberation theology of religions, Raymond Panikkar stressed for me, you must emphasize in theology of religions, you must respect the self-understanding people of other faiths have of their own religions. Without that, you cannot build a sound theology of religions or liberation theology of religions. I remember that. Now, some beginnings and orientations coming to the FABC. This is only a historical fact. With the orientation invitation given by the Vatican II and the post-conciliar documents also, which I made a reference to, the Federation of Asian Bishop Conference gave itself a vision for the mission of the church in Asia. It meant a new self-understanding of the church. It is church in dialogue on mission. It is church in dialogue on mission. It also meant the church is an insider and is part of the realities of the continent. The church is not outsider, it's an insider. We are part of the Asian realities. Sometime from the time 189 Asian bishops met together in Manila in 1970 on the occasion of the Pope Paul's sixth visit there, and reflected on the task of evangelization. For FABC, dialogue has been the essential mark of being church in Asia and its mode of doing mission. The first General Assembly in 1974, which took place in Taipei, understand the mission of the church in Asia in this way. I quote, the most basic mode of mission in Asia must be dialogue, missionary dialogue. Of course, must explore the interface of the gospel meanings and values with the realities of the Asia and its many people and its histories and cultures and religions and religious traditions, and especially its poor masses in every country. These realities, cultures, religious life, history, poverty make what we call today the ambient for the triple dialogue of the FABC. That's what it says. The same document continues. The overarching program of dialogue with the cultures, which will lead to what we call inculturation, with the religions and religious tradition, which we call interreligious dialogue, some call it interfaith dialogue, and with our peoples, especially the poor multitudes of Asia, which leads to the whole development and the liberation. This has been thematic background of both the pastoral and missionary activity of the local churches in Asia. The first Plenary Assembly, again, serves an overall framework for the missionary and pastoral activities of FABC in the succeeding years. Though it develops further, but it gives a focus for a future orientation. It was also understood that interreligious dialogue is neither a replacement for the proclamation of Christ nor a preliminary to proclamation. These are all important statements. We have their implication. The consequent plenary assemblies followed the orientation that the mode of dialogue is the way of being church and doing mission in Asia. It also meant engagement dialogue with the realities of the religions of the continent, the cultures, and the poor of Asia, which is the well-accepted triple dialogue. I will later on speak about in the future revisiting the triple dialogue. Okay. Then the FABC in its work through the plenary assemblies with various offices, especially the Office for Ecumenism and Interreligious Dialogue, promoted mission in the framework of the triple dialogue. Sri Lankan theologian Aloysius Perez says something beautiful. And he speaks of double baptism needed for the church in Asia. He says the church in Asia must undergo double baptism, and he calls it the baptism in the Jordan of Asian religiosity. The church in Asia should be baptized in the Jordan of Asian religiosity. Then you should be also undergo the baptism on the Calvary of the Asian poverty. These two realities definitely are embraced also by the triple dialogue. It's not outside of triple dialogue. I would say the theology dialogue in FABC has integrated the triple dialogue with the spirituality of double baptism. Actually, what Holy Spirit says it also means the spirituality. Baptized in the Jordan of Asian religiosity and baptized in the Calvary of Asian poverty is also spirituality. Okay, that with this, therefore, with that, I go to the common task. Then, the second plenary assembly in 1978 was on the prayer life of the church. It was held in Calcutta. In this context, we consider interreligious dialogue would enrich the prayer life and spirituality of the church by the spiritual traditions of other Asian religions. That means the dialogue place also we enter into the treasures of spirituality of Asian religion, which enrich our own understanding of dialogue and our own spirituality. Therefore, theology of dialogue always is inseparable from the spirituality of dialogue. Since our understanding of dialogue is not some theoretical, it's a practice, therefore they go together. Okay. Now, this Assembly of East Asian region, there was a special Assembly of East Asian region of FABC, which also affirms the interreligious dialogue as an integral part of the mission of the church. Okay, this idea comes, integral part moda, it comes again and again. I don't want to repeat that. Then one important thing, the Office for Dialogue and Ecumenism did something very important for the development of dialogue and its theology. And they organized a series of Bishops' Institute for Interreligious Affairs called BIRA. BIRA 1, BIRA 2, BIRA 3, any number. And in all of them, bringing together the Asian bishops in different countries, reflecting on the situation of pluralism, religious pluralism in their own respective countries, reflecting the light of faith, how do we relate to them, how do we foster, how do we promote that religious harmony between people, how we join hands for common issues of people, peace, justice and so on. They reflect in a series of meetings. And that's very important. And therefore we must acknowledge the contribution made by that Office for Interreligious Dialogue through BIRA. Now, when each BIRA meeting, certain aspects were taken up and emphasized. And one of the early meetings of this, BIRA, it speaks about the spirituality dialogue and also in the common task. Then in 1978, okay, that I already mentioned, coming to the East Asian region reflection, that assembly affirmed the intelligence as an integral part of the mission of the church, and also to serve as a common point of contact with religions and so on. Now, in 1974, this Office for Interreligious Dialogue and Ecumenism was established, and in 1979, it had its one of the early era one, if you can, and it affirmed again the dialogue as intrinsic to the way of the church, way of being church, way of doing mission, all those things. But also it emphasized this level of dialogue should go down to the grassroots, to the level of parish and communities and so on. So, and the one important thing the Bira made emphasized was the kind of spirituality and the attitudes you should have developed and so on. And therefore he emphasizes the various kinds of attitudes, and some of them are like this. These attitudes we need in the practice of dialogue are not merely human attitudes of etiquette, but also expressions of the spirituality of dialogue. Openness and sensitivity, receptivity, honesty, humility of spirit, sincerity, disinterestedness, and fraternal love that holds reverence for the feelings of others. Here also I want to mention one particular expression coming from Buddhism, referred to by Bishop Kenneth Gragg, a great Islamologist. He calls it Buddhist reverence for reverence. Buddhists have an attitude reverence for reverence. That is an attitude we should also adopt and make it our own. Then another important point of this Bira is that in order to grow in this theology of dialogue, practice of dialogue, all of us must go through a metanoia. We need a metanoia for a theology of dialogue. Without that, we will not fully enter into it. That is a change of attitudes. In a sense, people like Pires will call it the attitudes promoted by the Beatitudes. And he said, and that these attitudes should be beatitudinal, he would say. We need the beatitudinal attitudes of being Christians in Asia, disciples of Christ in Asia. Then coming to the certain aspects, I also want to stress that when the Bira were often talking about dialogue, it also develops a particular way of church being in Asia, and uses a language. I want to draw your attention to that. Though interreligious dialogue flows from the nature of the church, it's always a church is a community in pilgrimage, journeying with the people of other faiths towards the kingdom that is to come. Bira Po emphasized that. So, church is a community in pilgrimage, journeying with people of other faiths towards the kingdom that is to come. And that's a kind of language that comes again and again. We journey, travel together. The other is my fellow traveler. The other people of other faiths, our fellow believers, we are in the same journey, the common pilgrimage to the fullness of life willed by God for all people. Then, I don't want to, even what each Bira meeting decided so, is simply narrating chronologically what it is. So I emphasize here is some important point, that's all, to make it short. Then, one important thing, Bira 5 did something very important. It's not enough to have bishop coming together and reflecting on the practice of dialogue and what kind of theological support we need for this, what kind of attitude, spirituality, that's important, all this took place. But also he began arranging Bira meeting according to the religions of the countries where bishops come from. So it brings together bishops mostly living in the situation of Islamic religion. Bring them together and reflect on them. Church living in Islamic countries, how they can develop. Similarly, it brings together bishops living in Buddhist countries. Bring together how they develop a relationship to them and so on. Similarly, people who live mostly in a situation of Hinduism, like in India. Actually, one of the Bira meetings took place in Delhi, I was there. And it reflects how the church relates to people out there, especially Hindus, and what kind of dialogue spirituality will develop. That's also one of the contributions of this in FABC meeting and so on. And for example, the bishops of Malaysia and Singapore, Brunei, speak of what we also speaking about response to the Lineamanda for the Asian Synod. They have mentioned some important things. 5 minutes. So anyway, I already mentioned, but people I don't want to repeat. Now I want to come to the third part. third part is the vision of the future is important. Okay, a lot of beautiful things have taken place. We have widened horizons. We have made sure that the theological parameters support the praxis of dialogue, and therefore the theology of dialogue. All these are part of this contribution of FABC Office for Dialogue and Ecumenism. And also it says Christians in Asia must come together. Not only Catholic Church, but an ecumenical dimension for the dialogical praxis in Asia. That's why they had a number of meetings with the CCA and the other groups of other churches. Now coming to the third part, vision for the future theological dialogue. Of course, can we articulate what it means to be a Christian faith interreligiously in Asia? What do we have to do to promote this way of living? These questions will call for an ongoing reflection on the part of Christians, because they are continually changing. So new questions arise. So naturally, our reflection practice also change. Now I first mentioned the first part. I mentioned the points that will need consolidation, strengthening. Certain things have already gained. The gains should not be lost. We must strengthen them, consolidate them with a view to going further the future. Second point will be some new elements which will need greater emphasis, further development, some new ideas. That's why I put the recommendation under A and B. Under A, I mentioned point for consolidation and strengthening for the future. And the solidarity is an important idea they're developing, and this solidarity today calls for a new understanding, deeper rooting. And I says, in this sense, solidarity should become an epiphany, manifestation of a fundamental relational humanity. And this is very much emphasized, the social teaching of the church, solidarity. And yesterday we said, we had a nice paper on globalization challenges. And Pope John Paul II would say, globalization without marginalization, globalization gives solidarity, and also we had globalization of solidarity. The solidarity should become global, and so that idea is there. Then I mentioned, C, and A, I mentioned two examples. Very beautiful example. Cardinal Kuharik of Zagreb is known, he made this famous saying, and he was practicing that. He says, if someone burns down my house, I will go protect his house. If someone kills my father, I will go and protect his father. If someone burns down my church, I will go and protect his church. And another bishop will say, I will go, if he burns my church, I will go, if a Muslim burns my church, I will go and protect his mosque. That's another one who will say like that. And that's a beautiful example actually. Bishop Komarica of Banja Luka in Serbia, he also had brought Muslims to be protected in his own house, and there were 30 people living together under the same roof, and feeding them every day, protecting their human rights, and so on. Another beautiful example was King Hussein went to, this is a beautiful example. I happened to be in Jerusalem at the time, and a group of Jewish girls went on a picnic. It was on the border of Jordan. Almost the Jordan and Israel were good relations still there. And one soldier simply shot them. 30 of them were killed. Children, school children were killed, massacred. It's a big story. And naturally, the king of Jordan, the previous one, the father of the present one, immediately felt so bad. He made a visit to Israel, visited the families of all the parents, and the parents of the children were killed, and he did a beautiful thing. He will go, beg pardon for them, kneel down, and kiss the feet of the parents. That is narrated at the time. But it was at the time it happened to be in Jerusalem. Okay, this is some beautiful stories. And dialogue can never be a means. It is a value in itself. Interreligious relations is part of humanity, part of God's will. And some of these things you can read by yourself. Then coming to the part B, See, sometimes we have to have introspection, examine, are we ready for an ethical judgment that can come from other religions? Other religions can bring an ethical judgment about our religion. Are we ready, open enough, dialogical framework to receive that kind of criticism and judgment and purify ourselves? Then there is also a dimension which I want to emphasize. Today we have to learn the religion others well, and even the intelligent dialogue. The Office for Intelligent Dialogue used to have recommend strongly courses on the other religions and bringing reference to other religions to give us initiation and so on. And in this connection, I speak of revisiting the triple dialogue. Triple dialogue is good, beautiful, will continue, but it also needs widening the perspectives and the horizon. And I want to mention how do you widen that. There is a beautiful concept in the social teaching of the church. That is common good. Common good should be part of interreligious dialogue. It is all the religions working together, the common goal. There I mentioned, today the common good itself needs to be expanded. But the insights are coming from different religions, different cultures, different wisdom traditions and so on. We have to expand the common good. And the common good does not integrate that insights coming from other religious cultures for our common living together, or peaceful for developing public theology. If we do not have it, then we somehow fail in something. And therefore I emphasize that insights coming from other religions and cultures should enrich our common way of being, common good, which is also part of interreligious dialogue. Since almost time over, I'm going to conclude that. And I also mentioned, Pires mentions one important thing. I mentioned. He says, when we talk about religions and so on, we may study the texts, etc., learn other religions, but see, not focus so much on the content. We do not neglect the content of other religions, but what is the intent of the religion? We must discover the liberating intent of every religion. It is discovering the liberating intent of every religion. We come together for the common good, strive toward building a peaceful harmony, a harmony which will come always for new creative approaches as new problems develop and new challenges come. Actually, somebody put this question, and I'm concluding last word. After this is what happened in the United States, the famous 2001, 9/11, the Twin Tower. But after that kind of incident, how do you talk about interreligious dialogue? How do you talk about relation between other religions? The whole thing changes. A big tragedy similarly throws us back into what is happening to us. So that kind of thing also periodically will happen, and so on. And that is it should not take a negative withdraw. That should become an important creative impulse to rethink, discover the hidden meanings of our various religions and cultures, and bring out as the source for building a new world, new peaceful harmony, and so on. And that is an area we have still grown. And therefore, I concluded my presentation on a note of hope that in the early part of the third millennium would mark the hope, the beginning of a new spiral of creative and liberative interaction between Christians and people of other faiths for a civilization of solidarity and harmony, as Pope Paul VI and others would say, for a civilization of love. Thank you. I stop.
Thank you very much, Father Arokiasamy. I feel very sorry actually not to allow him enough time actually to get in dialogue with this difficult subject of theology of dialogue, but I think it refreshed us actually that dialogue has been a key word of our church's tradition and teaching for both Universal Church and FABC, and it it also brings us a lot of hope to deal with our challenges. Unfortunately, I think we do not have time now for questions. I think it will come afterwards. So